All right, and welcome to our sixth session of Education in the United States. This week we talk about instruction. I'm going to do a lecture on some broad instructional strategies that are out there. I'm going to show you a couple clips of classroom management strategies, for lack of a better word. You'll see what I mean. You have our usual seminar leadership and our second essential question. Okay, now, in thinking about instructional techniques, this lecture is not meant to give you a detailed understanding of each instructional strategy or framework. Okay, this is not about method. Method is its own course. Some of you are in the classroom, you're already doing these things, you know this stuff. Others are working towards your certification. You'll take courses that cover these topics in greater detail as they relate to being an elementary or a secondary teacher. So this is in no way exhaustive. Rather, the idea of this lesson is to provide you with a broad overview of several frameworks that you'll likely encounter in the classrooms of the United States. Also, these frameworks overlap and are not exclusive. All right? Good instruction will likely include a blending of several styles. Okay, so first thing is teacher-centered instruction. This is probably the traditional form of classroom methodology that you've encountered in your own education. This is the so-called sage on the stage approach to teaching. Right? The teacher is the source of knowledge and skills. As such, the teacher chooses the topics that will be covered. The focus is on what the teacher knows. The teacher talks, the students listen. Students generally work alone, and these are classrooms that tend to be very quiet. The advantages of teacher-centered instruction, well, you're able to set up very specific learning targets. Students are told reasons why content is important. It helps to clarify learning objectives. It's a widely accepted instructional method, and it's good for teaching specific facts and very basic skills. It's also good for covering large amounts of information in smaller chunks of time. Some disadvantages or challenges to using this methodology. It's known to stifle student creativity. It requires well-organized content preparation and good oral communication skills. Lecturing is not an easy thing to do. Lots of people do it, but very few are actually good at it. Steps must be followed in a very prescribed order if it's going to make sense to the students. And it may not be effective for higher-order thinking skills, right? Because students tend to be passive receptacles of information rather than active learners when lecturing is going on. Okay, now a lot of schools of ed, or a lot of students, will leave schools of ed thinking that lecture is bad, or that they're being told that lecture is bad. And I disagree with that. And I think most people in colleges of education would disagree with that lecture is automatically a bad thing. But I think lecture is ubiquitous, meaning it happens everywhere. And I would think, and I'm speaking for myself, but I would think most people who work with teachers would like lecture to be one of many strategies that are used in a classroom, and not the strategy, which is how lecture tends to be used in many classrooms. So this is some examples. A method called direct instruction. Lecture with small points of discussion. And the initiate response method of questioning. Initiate response means if we were in a traditional classroom, maybe I'd call on one of you to recall a point from my lecture. Or from some activity that you've just done. Very one-to-one. I ask a question, one student answers, another student answers. There's not engagement between students necessarily. Now the opposite of that is learner-centered instruction. Okay, and of course this is as the term suggests, it's something that focuses on both student and instructor. Right? The instructor models. Students interact with the instructor and each other. Students work in pairs, in groups, or alone depending on the purpose of the activity. And students have some choice in activity and some choice in topics. Students evaluate their own learning. The instructor also evaluates the students. And classrooms that use learner-centered instruction tend to be very noisy and very busy. Some advantages to learner-centered instruction. Well, students are often motivated to participate because they have choices. It's responsive to individual students' needs. Student engagement as a result of that is much more likely than in a teacher-centered model. And as a result, students are active participants in the lesson's activities. Of course, there's challenges to this. Classroom management concerns. It's a little harder to know where your students are at and what they're up to if everybody's doing something a little bit different at their own pace. Requires a significant amount of preparation, right? A lot of moving parts and a lot of things that you have to take into consideration. Teachers must know the student's abilities and prior knowledge very well to enact this. And the teacher needs to be flexible. Time frames for activities vary according to the skill levels of the students. So some examples, well, we're going to talk about some of them. This is a very broad way to put it, learner-centered instruction. So we're going to talk about some of these examples like cooperative learning, differentiated instruction, small group discussions, Socratic seminars are all examples of learner-centered instruction. This is a little closer to the Deweyan ideal, or what John Dewey wanted classrooms to look like. So differentiated instruction, or sometimes known as DI, you're going to hear a lot about this throughout your career, I'm imagining. It's a mostly learner-centered approach. It avoids the one-size-fits-all approach of teacher-centered instruction. It provides students with different avenues to the same content and skills. So it starts with the approach that students vary in culture, socioeconomic status, language, gender, motivation, ability, disability, personal interests, and more. And teachers need to be aware of these varieties as they are planning their curriculum. Differentiated lessons are responsive to student variety and readiness levels, interests, and learning profiles. So teachers can differentiate in 4 ways. They can differentiate the content, meaning students can pursue different things within the content area. The process, meaning you differentiate throughout a lesson, different modes of instruction. Sometimes you might lecture, sometimes there might be discussion, sometimes there might be group work. The product, meaning what students do with the actual learning, how they are assessed, and learning environment based on the individual learner. A pre-assessment, so you know where your students are at, and ongoing assessments are essential to differentiated instruction. So what are the advantages? Well, it targets every learner. Think of our multiple intelligences reading for this week. It ideally helps to foster mutual responsibility. It's supported by research as an effective technique of instruction. And students learn to be patient, less critical, and more compassionate when DI is done well. At least that's the hope. Of course, it's not easy. Some students don't work well in a differentiated environment. They become overwhelmed by the options. And especially overwhelmed if they're working with students who really thrive in it. It can be intimidating for some students. Students who prefer to work alone, who are quiet and shy, find it hard to share answers. And then aggressive students will try to take over. And of course, there's questions about whether this is realistic in the actual classroom, right? Those advantages, when I mention those advantages, we're talking about the best possible scenarios, the most ideal scenarios. The larger the class size, the more difficult to enact differentiated instruction. So some examples of DI, brainstorming, jigsaws, tiered instruction, tic-tac-toe instruction menus. Okay, these are all strategies that I imagine you'll encounter in your methods courses, but if you're interested in them, if you Google tic-tac-toe instruction menu, you'll see what that is. It's simply a way of giving students options in terms of what activities they pursue within a content area. Okay, cooperative learning is something that we read about this week in the Johnson & Johnson article. It's a learner-centered approach. Students work together to achieve shared goals in small groups. Students see outcomes that are beneficial to everyone, and all students perform higher if they than if they worked alone when cooperative learning is done well. Now, there's 5 essential elements of cooperative learning. Positive interdependence, the idea that one student cannot succeed unless everyone succeeds, which is done through multiple learning goals, joint rewards, divided resources, complementary roles, and so on. Individual accountability, the performance of each student is assessed, right? So it's not just about the group getting a grade, but individuals get grades as well. Face-to-face promotive interaction, individuals promote each other's success by helping, assisting, supporting, encouraging, and praising each other's efforts to achieve. And size of groups needs to be small to make this happen. Social skills, interpersonal and small group skills. These skills must be taught. So you shouldn't assume students know how to work together in cooperative groups. They need to be trained to do this. And group processing. Group members discuss how well they are achieving their goals and maintaining effective relationships. Some advantages: this develops both content knowledge and social skills. There's a strong body of research that suggests this is a highly successful method. Johnson & Johnson have been working and refining this over the years, over decades. In studies, working together to achieve a common goal produces higher achievement and greater productivity than working alone. Creates more student engagement. And working cooperatively with peers and valuing cooperation results in greater psychological health, higher self-esteem, and greater social competencies than does competing with peers or working independently. Now, there are challenges to this. Tons of prior planning is required to make this work. It's also very timely. These activities tend to take place over several class periods to several weeks. It's not something you can do in a day. Students will receive, or are likely to receive, a great deal of depth about a particular topic, but not much breadth, which might not coalesce very well with your curricular goals or your Common Core objectives that you're expected to meet. So there's questions over whether this type of learning method is appropriate for test preparation, which is kind of the buzzword today. And of course, it threatens to alienate certain students who would prefer to work alone. So some examples of this: lab work in science classes is an example of cooperative learning, team games with individual accountability, interactive role-playing and simulations, and peer reviews of work are all examples of cooperative learning. Now, understanding by design is not necessarily an instructional method, but a curricular map for planning out instructional methods. Okay, so it's a method for structuring learning activities according to enduring understandings. Okay, and the method here is called backwards design. It's the practice of looking at the outcomes in order to design curriculum units, performance assessments, and classroom instruction. Okay, so according to UBD proponents, teachers traditionally start curriculum planning with activities and textbooks instead of identifying classroom learning goals and then planning towards that larger goal. In backwards design, the teacher starts with classroom outcomes, meaning what the student ought to learn at the end of the class or at the end of the unit. Then they begin planning the curriculum, choosing activities and materials that help determine student ability and foster student learning. Teaching for understanding demands that there be coherent curriculum design and clear distinctions between big ideas and essential questions. Teachers should tell the students about big ideas and essential questions, performance requirements, and evaluative criteria at the beginning of a unit or course. Students should be able to describe the goals, those big ideas and essential questions, and performance requirements of the unit or course. The learning environment should have high expectations and incentives for all students to come to understand the big ideas and answer the essential questions. All right, so in UBD, you would start with the enduring understanding, meaning the things that students absolutely need to know once they leave the classroom. Right, these are the big ideas that have transferred to real-world applications, and if they were to leave your whatever class without knowing these things, it would be awful. Then you think about what is it important for them to know. Okay, so what type of knowledge or skills do they need to have to work with these enduring understandings? And then finally, what are some of the things that are worth being familiar with, which usually accounts for background information or factual data that contributes to the other two learning goals. And proponents of the UBD framework say that teachers tend to focus on this outer circle, and then they lose the inner circle as a result. Students don't know what the big point of learning calculus is or what the point of learning social studies is if they focus on the minutia and the detail, but not on these larger ideas that are sort of, I don't want to say eternal, but have carry through to other content areas and other environments beyond the classroom. So some advantages to UBD. Well, it's a coherent curriculum if you plan this way. Instructional methods and performance assessments work in tandem. So it's not scattershot. It's not all over the place. Students are able to take ownership of their learning when they know what the enduring understandings are. They know what their end goals are. If students are aware of the logic behind the progression through the curriculum. There's greater familiarity with performance assessments, and thus creates higher performance on standardized exams. At least that's what the people, Wiggins and McTighe, who created UBD, argue. Of course, it's not easy to do. It's not easy to plan a curriculum this way. It requires a great deal of familiarity with the content of the curriculum. Significant planning is required. It's not ideal for novice teachers. Teachers who have already taught their curriculum once before will find it easier to plan using the UBD framework. So some examples, well, finding specific examples of UBD are difficult because this is a framework for planning instruction, not necessarily an instructional method. So all the above methods could work within the UBD framework. It just depends on what the enduring understandings are. But essential questions guide the overall learning of a curricular unit, not lesson objectives. They connect to larger issues in the students' lives and worlds. And those that use the UBD framework say that an inquiry process model works best, where students seek out content to answer the essential questions over the course of a school year. Right, the Wiggins and McTighe describe it as a curriculum that treats students like potential performers, meaning the idea is you're not simply learning for the sake of demonstrating something in the classroom, but you're learning for the sake of real-world application. Okay, now classroom management. The Mahaney and Sagan article hinted at classroom management issues. Their central thesis is that if teachers build personal relationships with their students, they are much more likely to have actively engaged classrooms. Couched within this premise is the idea that these relationships will also prevent management issues from arising and will give teachers the pathways to resolving them quickly. Of course, I think any teacher who's been in the classroom for any length of time will tell you that there are always exceptional students who resist efforts at building personal relationships. And so classroom management issues are oftentimes kind of the biggest concerns of novice educators, for good reason. So what I did this week is I emailed a bunch of my teacher friends, and I just said, hey, what are the best classroom management tips that you would offer to, young teachers or new teachers? So this is my totally unscientifically collected pieces of classroom advice that these teachers gave me. Okay, they said, keep the lesson moving. If you have a 45-minute period, plan 3 different activities. Try to keep students up and out of their seats at least once during the class period. Those students with pent-up energy will thank you for it. Right? So rather than doing one 45-minute activity, try to plan a couple of different activities. Along that same line, don't lecture for the whole period. Students who are actively engaged in a learning activity are generally not disrupting the class. Hands-on activities work great for vivacious classrooms. Talk to your students. If you see them in the hall, in the cafeteria, or at the grocery store, ask them how they are. If you see a student in the local newspaper, congratulate them. If they do something nice, tell them that you appreciate their kindness. This lets them know that you really do care about them. And I would say those teachers that coach or run extracurricular activities, after school workshops with students and whatnot, it's much easier to build those relationships through those avenues. When students are being disruptive by talking, poking, pulling, or crumpling paper, go stand by them. This sends a direct message to stop what they are doing. Most of the time, they will stop and get back to work. Right? Don't say anything. Just walk over to them and stand behind them. When you have stood by the student, talk to the student, and kept them busy with lessons, and they are still disruptive, then take them in the hallway. Ask them, are you okay? Personally, it has been my experience that they crumble and tell you that they are, they will tell you that they've had a fight with their parents, didn't get up on time, having issues with their boyfriend or girlfriend. If they're defiant, send them on to the principal. But in my 6 years of teaching, I've sent very few students to the principal's office for classroom disruptions. Right? The principals don't want your students in their office, and you don't want to send them there. You want to isolate the student as an absolute last resort. The idea should not be removing them from the classroom, though, because then they miss out on the learning, they fall behind, they're even more ostracized from the rest of the class. Okay, but I found that having those isolated conversations go a long way. Okay, now I have a discussion thread that you can contribute to. I would especially encourage you to do this if you're already in the classroom, to maybe add to what the list of teachers who I spoke with said. But I also want to show you 2 classroom management clips. And there are 2 approaches, very divergent approaches to classroom management. I'm going to play the clips here, but I'm going to put the links up as well in case they don't work very well, so you can go to them as well. So I'm going to show you these clips, then I'm going to ask you to go to the discussion board and just post your thoughts on them. Okay, the first is called Power Teaching.
I'm going to use power teaching to teach power teaching. Give me an ooh. Ooh. Now when I say class, you say yes. Class? Yes. However I say class, that's how you say yes. Class, class. Yes, yes. Class, yes. It has to be class. Yes, yes. Now, when I say teach, you say okay. And what I want you to do is, when you say okay, I want you to turn to your neighbors. Using gestures, teach your neighbors everything I've taught you. I've taught you the class yes and the teach okay. Here we go. Teach. Okay. So, he says class, he says yes. However, he says class, he says yes. When he says teach, he says okay. Teach quiet. Yes. Very, very good. Give me an ah. Ah. Now, look up here, please. I've taught you the class yes, the teach okay. Now I'm going to teach you the scoreboard. Give me a Today, we're playing for extra credit or dextra credit. Rubbing your hands together, tell your neighbor, oh, sweet mama, I love extra credit. Teach! Okay! Oh, sweet mama, I love extra credit. Class? Yes! Now, in other power teaching classrooms, we could play for a smiley face or a frowny face. That might mean more or less recess time. Give me an in this class, many times we played for more homework or less homework. Explain to your neighbors the 3 kinds of scoreboards. More or less homework, smiley frowny, extra credit, dextra credit. Teach! Okay! So, we got 3 kinds of scoreboards. We got more homework, less homework. We got more recess, smiley, and today, we're playing for extra credit on the final or dextra credit on the final. I'm dextra credit. Yes! Now, let's rehearse. Give me an ah. Because in power teaching, we never scold. We just rehearse. Give me an oh. Now, when you do really good, I will put a mark here for extra credit. Hold it. You will give me a mighty oh yeah. Hold it. Oh yeah! When I put a mark here for dextra credit, you're not doing quite so good. You'll give me the mighty groan with the eye rub and hold it. Oh. Class? Yes. Explain to your neighbor about class yes, teach okay, scoreboard, mighty groan, mighty oh yeah, and don't forget the mighty groan with the weepy eye rub. Teach! Okay. All right, so far it's about over. You know everything. Don't stop. Yes! Class, you are doing so good, I think it's time for some real extra credit. Hold it. Oh, yeah! Not quite fast enough. And from. Oh. Tell your neighbor how important it is to be fast when you're getting the extra credit. Okay!
All right, so you get the idea. If you want to watch the whole, the whole video, you can, because you have the link right here. So that's power teaching. That's one idea of classroom management. Notice they said that works from kindergarten through college. And here's a very, very different approach to classroom management issues.
So take it over there. If you can't squash it like gentlemen and get out of his face, get out of mine, get over there. Take it, Anthony. Now, you want to squash this, deal with that off campus. Y'all don't do that in here. And whatever made you believe you could, we can squash this right now. Get back up, you got something else to say. Come back this way, you got something else to say. Anybody else? Trust me, we take to the grass. Trust me. It's been that kind of a Tuesday. Too young and life is too short. Y'all be selling out with that kind of nonsense. This ain't no Crip blood kind of nonsense. It ain't nothing so crucial. We can't talk it out and get out. I said, take out some paper. You got a mini mission.
All right, so you have two very different ideas behind classroom management. So what I'd like you to do is head over to the discussion board. There's a thread there for classroom management issues. You can add to the list that I gave, but also just post your personal reactions to these two strategies, for lack of a better word, for classroom management. Okay, this week we also have our seminar leadership and our second essential question.